America has fought in more wars across the world than any modern republic in history. From frozen mountains to burning deserts, from wooden ships to nuclear submarines, its soldiers have crossed oceans, marched through jungles, stormed beaches, and fought in places most Americans could not even find on a map. And since the day this nation declared its freedom, more than 1.3 million Americans have died wearing its uniform. But here's the strange part. The first Americans didn't fight the British. They fought tax collectors. They fought pirates off the coast of North Africa. They fought farmers in western Pennsylvania over whiskey. Before America became the country that could send armies to the other side of the planet, it was a young, nervous republic trying to stop itself from falling apart. And that's what most people never hear. Most people think America was born in one clean revolution. 13 colonies rising up, defeating the British Empire, and becoming the United States. But that's not what happened. The real America was not built in one war. It was forged in rebellion after rebellion, frontier battle after frontier battle, crisis after crisis, century after century. Every victory made it stronger. Every war made it bigger. And every enemy it defeated created a new one waiting somewhere over the horizon. So how did 250 years of rebellion, expansion, ideology, oil, and nuclear fear turn 13 small colonies on the edge of the Atlantic into the most powerful military force on Earth? To answer that, we have to go back to a time before America fought the world, when it first had to survive itself. Long before there was a stars and stripes, long before there was a president, a Congress, or even a country called America, this land was already at war. In the 1600s, North America was not one nation. It was a giant prize. Forests that seemed endless. Rivers that led deep into the unknown. Mountains filled with fur, timber, land, and power. And across that massive continent, 3 European empires wanted it all. Britain pushed in from the east. France moved down from the cold north. Spain held the south and the west. Each empire built forts. Each empire raised flags. And each empire promised that this land belonged to them. But there was one problem. Millions of people were already living here. Powerful native nations like the Iroquois, the Cherokee, and the Shawnee had ruled these lands for generations. Some made alliances. Some traded. Some fought. And many were forced to do all three just to survive. As the empires moved deeper into the continent, small border fights turned into bloody raids. Villages burned in the night. Families disappeared into the forests. Scouts moved through snow with rifles on their backs. Men learned to fight from behind trees instead of standing in neat lines. This was not European war anymore. This was American war. Then, in 1754, everything exploded. Britain and France crashed into each other in what became known as the French and Indian War, a brutal fight that stretched from the forests of Ohio to the edges of Canada. Young colonial soldiers marched beside British redcoats. They built forts. They crossed frozen rivers. They watched friends die in ambushes they never saw coming. One of those young officers was a tall Virginian named George Washington. For 9 long years, the fighting spread across the continent. And in 1763, Britain finally won. France was pushed out. Spain pulled back. The British Empire now controlled more land than ever before. It looked like total victory. But wars are expensive, and someone had to pay. So London looked across the ocean at the very colonists who had helped win the empire and sent them the bill. Taxes, rules, soldiers in their towns. Orders from men who had never set foot in America. And suddenly, the same farmers, hunters, traders, and soldiers who had once fought for the crown began asking a dangerous question. What happens when the empire you helped build starts treating you like the enemy? Britain had won an empire and accidentally armed a rebellion. The first shots came before sunrise. On April 19, 1775, in the small towns of Lexington and Concord, British soldiers marched through the morning fog with one clear mission: seize colonial weapons, crush the growing rebellion, and remind the colonies who was in charge. Instead, they walked straight into history. No one knows who fired the first shot. But once the smoke cleared, 8 colonists lay dead, and the British were suddenly fighting farmers, blacksmiths, shopkeepers, and hunters who knew every road, every stone wall, and every tree. By the time the Redcoats limped back to Boston, nearly 300 of them had been killed, wounded, or captured. The rebellion was no longer talk. Now it was war. And on paper, it looked hopeless. Britain had the strongest army on earth, the strongest navy, more money, more guns, more trained soldiers, more everything. The colonies had arguments, fear, and a lot of men who had never fought a real battle. So they turned to a man who had already seen war. A tall Virginian named George Washington took command in 1775. What he inherited barely looked like an army. Some men carried hunting rifles. Some had no uniforms. Some had no blankets. Some had no boots. And some had already gone home. Then came winter. At Valley Forge, snow covered the ground. Hunger spread through camp. Disease moved faster than bullets. Soldiers wrapped bloody feet in cloth because their shoes were gone. Desertions rose. Graves filled. A British officer looked at Washington's starving army and laughed. "You have no army." Washington didn't blink. "Then why are you still here?" Because somehow they kept surviving. They struck fast at Trenton. They held the line when nobody thought they could. And slowly, something even bigger happened. Britain started making enemies. In 1778, France entered the war, not because they loved liberty, but because they hated Britain even more. French money arrived. French ships arrived. French soldiers arrived. And suddenly, this tiny rebellion became a global fight. Then, in 1781, at Yorktown, the trap finally closed. British General Charles Cornwallis was surrounded by American and French forces on land and French warships at sea. There was nowhere left to run. When Cornwallis surrendered, the strongest empire on earth had lost to men who once had no shoes. But this wasn't really victory. It was survival. America had won its freedom. Now it had to keep it. Winning freedom was the easy part. Keeping it alive, that was harder. When the war with Britain ended in 1783, the new United States looked weak, broke, and surrounded by enemies. It had no king, no real navy, no giant army, and no clear idea if this strange new republic would last 10 years or fall apart by morning. But one thing was already clear. America did not plan to stay small. The first test came far from home. Across the Atlantic, on the coast of North Africa, pirates from the Barbary coast were capturing American ships and holding sailors for ransom. For years, European powers simply paid the pirates and moved on. America chose something else. In 1801, President Thomas Jefferson sent warships across the ocean. It was America's first war overseas. A young nation, barely standing, was already fighting pirates half a world away. And that was only the beginning. In 1812, America turned back toward its old enemy. Once again, it was war with *** United Kingdom. American forces invaded Canada. British troops burned Washington. Even the White House went up in flames. But when the smoke cleared, America had survived again. And survival started feeling a lot like destiny. Then came a hard, sharp man from Tennessee. Andrew Jackson fought native nations in the South, crushed resistance, and built a reputation as a hero. To many Americans, he looked fearless. To others, he looked like a storm. Because as settlers pushed west, native nations stood in the way of farms, roads, cotton, and money. So Washington made a choice. Move them. In 1830, Congress passed the Indian Removal Act. Entire nations like the Cherokee Nation were forced from their homes. Families walked through rain, mud, hunger, and winter cold. Thousands died on what became known as the Trail of Tears. The nation born in rebellion was now forcing others off their land. Freedom for some, conquest for others. And still, America wanted more. In 1846, war broke out with Mexico. American armies marched south. Battles exploded across deserts, mountains, and walled cities. Less than 2 years later, Mexico was defeated, and America took huge pieces of the map. Texas, California, the Southwest, land stretching all the way to the Pacific. Turns out Manifest Destiny looked a lot like somebody else's map disappearing. By 1860, the United States was bigger than anyone had imagined. Richer than before, stronger than before, and more divided than ever. By 1860, the United States stretched from the Atlantic to the Pacific. It had more land, more people, more money. But underneath all that growth, something dangerous was breaking apart. Every new state raised the same burning question. Would slavery grow with the nation, or die with it? North and South argued for years. In Congress, in newspapers, in churches, around dinner tables, on dusty roads between farms. Then the talking stopped. In April 1861, in the harbor of Charleston, Confederate guns opened fire on Fort Sumter. The American Civil War had begun, and for the first time in its short history, America pointed its guns at itself. This was not redcoats against rebels. This was brother against brother, father against son, neighbor against neighbor. Men who spoke the same language, prayed in the same churches, and carried the same family names now stood on opposite sides of the battlefield. At first, many thought the war would be quick. One big battle, one clear winner, one fast ending. They were wrong, very wrong. Soon, green farmland became killing fields. Quiet rivers turned red. Railroad tracks carried troops, cannon, and bodies across the country. Factories in the north poured out rifles, uniforms, bullets, and steel. Telegraph wires carried orders faster than horses ever could. Industrial warfare had crashed straight into American farmland, and the result was slaughter. At Battle of Gettysburg, nearly 50,000 men were killed, wounded, or missing in just 3 days. 3 days. Entire towns became hospitals. Church floors became operating rooms. Fields filled with broken wagons, torn flags, and men calling for mothers who would never hear them. And still the war kept going. Then Union General William Tecumseh Sherman marched through the South like a moving firestorm. Railroads were ripped apart. Farms were burned. Cities fell. His message was simple: break the South, and break its will to fight. Above it all stood Abraham Lincoln, carrying the weight of a nation that seemed ready to tear itself in half. He spoke of union. He spoke of freedom. He spoke of a country still worth saving. By the time the guns finally went silent in 1865, more than 620,000 Americans were dead. Not from a foreign invasion. Not from an empire across the ocean. From each other. America had survived. But after killing so many of its own, what exactly had it become? The Civil War had nearly destroyed America, but it also changed it. Factories grew bigger. Railroads crossed the continent. Steel replaced wood. Oil replaced muscle. Cities exploded with people, money, and machines. And by the end of the 1800s, the United States was no longer a fragile republic trying to survive. It was becoming something else. Something hungry. In 1898, that hunger found its first global target. War broke out with Spain. It lasted only a few months, but the result changed everything. American ships smashed the Spanish fleet. American troops stormed beaches in Cuba. Spanish power collapsed almost overnight. And when the war ended, America did not just win. It took Puerto Rico, Guam, the Philippines. The young republic that once fought empires now had colonies of its own. In the Philippines, local fighters who thought America came as an ally suddenly found themselves fighting a new ruler instead. Freedom had crossed an ocean and arrived carrying rifles. Then, in 1917, Europe was drowning in mud, blood, and barbed wire. The First World War had already killed millions. At first, America stayed out. Then German submarines sank ships. Secret messages were uncovered. And President Woodrow Wilson made his choice. American soldiers crossed the Atlantic. In the trenches of Western Front, they learned the new face of war: machine guns, poison gas, and artillery so loud it shook the earth itself. When the war ended, America returned home stronger, richer, and more confident. But the world was not finished. Not even close. Then came December 7th, 1941. Morning breaks over Pearl Harbor. Bombs fall. Ships burn. Radios scream. Sailors run through smoke and fire as the sky fills with enemy planes. Within hours, thousands are dead. And in one single morning, everything changes. America is now fully at war. Its factories roar day and night. Millions join the military. Ships, tanks, rifles, and planes pour out faster than the world has ever seen. Then, on D-Day, American soldiers crash onto the beaches of France under machine gun fire. And in August 1945, one American bomber drops a single bomb over Hiroshima. One flash. One city. One new age. The war ends. But something even bigger has begun. After this, America would never fight only for itself again. When the Second World War ended, millions celebrated. Church bells rang. Streets filled with dancing. Soldiers came home. Factories slowed down. Families believed the worst was finally over. They were wrong. Because this next war would not begin with a gunshot. It would begin with fear. By 1945, only two giants were left standing: the United States and the Soviet Union. One believed in free markets, private business, and democracy. The other believed in communist rule, state control, and one-party power. Both had huge armies. Both had spies. And now, both had nuclear weapons. The world had survived one fire. Now it lived under a bigger one. This became known as the Cold War. Cold, because the two superpowers never officially declared war on each other. But make no mistake, people still died. The first test came in 1950. On the divided Korean peninsula, communist forces from the north crossed the border into the south. Within days, America was back in combat. In the mountains of South Korea, soldiers fought through snow, ice, and gunfire. Hills changed hands again and again. Entire units vanished in frozen valleys. When the fighting finally slowed, millions were dead, and the border barely moved. Then the fear came home. Across America, school bells rang. Children stood up. Teachers pointed to the floor. And millions of kids practiced hiding under wooden desks, as if thin pieces of wood could stop nuclear fire. That was normal now. Then, in 1962, the world came closer to ending than ever before. American spy planes found Soviet missiles in Cuba, just 90 miles from Florida. For 13 days, President John F. Kennedy and Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev stared each other down. Ships moved. Bombers waited. Nuclear crews stood ready. One wrong move, and millions could vanish. But somehow, the missiles turned back. The world survived. Barely. Then came Vietnam. Jungles. Monsoons. Helicopters. Napalm. Hidden tunnels. Young soldiers fighting an enemy they often could not see. America dropped more bombs than in all of World War II. And still, the war dragged on. Because here was the cruel truth. The strongest military in history can't bomb an ideology. And Vietnam was only one battlefield. There were secret wars, proxy wars, coups, and rebellions from Latin America to Africa to the Middle East. For nearly 50 years, The Cold War shaped almost everything. Then, in 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. Its flag came down. Its empire broke apart. And for the first time in generations, America stood alone. For almost 50 years, America had built its military around one giant enemy, the Soviet Union. Now that enemy was gone. No rival superpower. No equal army. No nation strong enough to challenge America head-on. For the first time in modern history, one country stood above everyone else. And it planned to stay there. The first test came in 1991. When Iraq invaded Kuwait, the United States built one of the largest military coalitions the world had ever seen. Then the skies lit up. Cruise missiles screamed through the night. Tanks rolled across the desert. Satellites tracked targets from space. Television cameras broadcast the war live into family living rooms. This was the Gulf War. And to many people, it looked almost effortless. In just weeks, Iraqi forces were crushed. America looked unstoppable. Fast, precise, untouchable. But then came a morning that changed everything. September 11th, 2001. In New York City, people looked up and saw smoke pouring into the sky. Planes hit. Buildings burned. Radios screamed. Sirens echoed through streets filled with ash. And in a single day, nearly 3,000 people were dead. America had spent a century preparing for armies, fleets, and missiles. Now its enemy carried box cutters. And suddenly, the most powerful military on Earth was fighting something much harder to find: an idea. Within weeks, American forces entered Afghanistan. Special forces moved through mountains. Bombers hit hidden camps. The Taliban fell fast. Then, in 2003, America invaded Iraq again. This time to remove Saddam Hussein. Baghdad fell. Statues came down. The headlines called it victory. But then the war changed. Roadside bombs. Hidden fighters. Suicide attacks. Enemies who melted into crowds, then struck without warning. The battlefield had no front line anymore. And above it all, drones now circled silently in skies half a world away, hunting targets by camera, heat, and signal. Years passed. Then more years. Children who were born after the 9th of November started school while the wars were still going. Then high school. Then college. An entire generation grew up knowing only war. And that was the twist nobody saw coming. America could win battles. America could topple governments. America could cross oceans in days. But ending wars, that turned out to be much harder. And after 20 years, trillions of dollars, and thousands of lives lost. What had actually changed? In August 2021, the last American troops left Kabul. Helicopters lifted off. Crowds ran across airport runways. Cameras captured people clinging to planes as the final chapter of America's longest war came to an end. Or at least, that's what it looked like. Because the truth is, America's wars never really ended. They just changed shape. Right now, as you watch this, the United States has more than 750 military bases spread across the planet. From frozen Arctic stations to desert airfields, from island runways in the Pacific to hidden radar sites deep in Europe, American power never really sleeps. Somewhere beneath the ocean, Ohio-class submarine crews move through complete darkness, carrying enough nuclear firepower to destroy entire nations. High above the clouds, satellites watch borders, ships, missile sites, and troop movements in real time. Far from any battlefield, military hackers fight silent wars through cables, screens, servers, and code. And somewhere in the sky, drones circle so high that nobody on the ground can hear them. The battlefield is no longer just land, or sea, or air. Now it's space. It's cyberspace. It's data. It's artificial intelligence. And nowhere feels more tense than the Pacific, where American ships, aircraft, and alliances now watch every move made by China. Because history has a strange habit. Every time America defeats one enemy, another one appears over the horizon. And maybe that's the real story. America's story isn't really about war. It's about what happens when a nation built to survive becomes powerful enough to shape the planet. From farmers with hunting rifles, to aircraft carriers, satellites, cyber weapons, and machines that can think faster than humans. This story has never really been about winning. It's been about what power becomes once it has no equal. And that leaves one final question. Can a country built by war ever truly stop preparing for the next one? Drop your thoughts below. Which American war changed history the most? And if you think America's rise was brutal, wait until you see the empire that taught it how power really works.